Your insiders, Darren Dreger, Pierre Lebrun, and Chris Johnston. And gentlemen, the KHL Twitter account got absolutely ratioed today after promoting its playoffs. It tweeted, "The KHL is back," met with hundreds of angry replies, just general disdain and Ukrainian flags. CJ, what does it mean to this league with the sanctions and the general isolation of Russia that's happening right now?
Well, the league might be back, but it looks, a fair bit different than it did prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And that's because sources indicate a number of players that are foreigners in that league, those from outside of Russia, have initiated having their contracts terminated in recent days, wanting to get out of Russia. And that includes, some North Americans, guys who played in the NHL in the past, like Shane Prince, Jeff Platt, Nick Shore. And these are prominent players over in that league. And so in addition to the two teams you had drop out of the KHL right before the playoffs, you now have a number of foreigners running away, and it's left things rather unstable. One agent over there told me that his client that had money stored in rubles has basically seen that amount of money decrease by half because of that currency's instability. And so some are wondering about the long-term viability of the KHL. So they've got the playoffs going, but there's a lot of wreckage around those playoffs.
Back over here, when a player who is asked for a trade scores a hat trick, that certainly will bolster his trade value or make the team he still plays on want to keep him even more. So where does that fall in with Jake DeBrusk and the Bruins after his hat trick against the Kings on Monday night, Pierre?
Yeah, so James, it's a great question. It's one that I had, and what I can tell you, in speaking Jake DeBrusk's agent Rick Vallette on this day, is that there has not been a change of heart, that the trade demand remains in place for Jake DeBrusk to hopefully, in his case, get a trade out of Boston by the March 21st trade deadline. Now, the other thing that Rick Vallette talked about is this, that he has informed teams, and by the way, he has permission to talk directly to other teams, that they're willing to work on an extension to help facilitate a deal, because a lot of teams are concerned about that $4.4 million qualifying offer to retain his rights this summer. Maybe an extension at a cheaper price and everyone goes home happy. Bottom line is, if he keeps scoring, he's playing a bigger role right now, it might help the Boston Bruins and Don Sweeney get better offers than they've had to date.
Few contending teams with leaky goaltending as of late, which always leads us back to Marc-Andre Fleury. The latest, CJ.
Well, the latest is, Kyle Davidson, the new general manager of the Blackhawks, had a press availability on Tuesday and interestingly said he sees this as a rebuild. He's talking about trading away assets for futures. And so you wouldn't think a 37-year-old goaltender would be staying with that team given that scenario. But it does sound like at this point in time, Marc-Andre Fleury is leaning towards finishing out the season in Chicago. He's on the final year of his contract. Now, he has a 10-team no-trade list, so technically the Blackhawks could still move him. But there seemed to be an understanding at the time. He was dealt from Vegas to Chicago last summer that they would do right by him. And there's a little bit of time here for him to change his mind. But at this point, with less than 3 weeks to the deadline, it doesn't sound like he's too inclined to move.
Well, and beyond Fleury, the future of Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane will soon be at the forefront. Both of those players on their long-term deals have 1 year remaining at $10.5 million per. Kyle Davidson has declared the Chicago Blackhawks are in a rebuild. So his next move is to likely have a conversation, perhaps as early as this week, with Kane and Toews agent Pat Brisson to start mapping out what the future for these two stars looks like. Is it in Chicago? Potentially, is it elsewhere? They both have trade protection. That's pretty obvious. It seems a stretch to suggest that anything happens before the summer outside of that conversation between Davidson and Pat Brisson.
Claude Giroux might not be as much of a stretch. And look, Claude Giroux can do whatever he wants. Selfishly, you would love to have a name like Claude Giroux involved come trade center time. What do you think likely happens at this point in time, Pierre?
Yeah, we're less than 3 weeks out, and what I can tell you is that Claude Giroux still hasn't gone to the Flyers and said, okay, I'm ready to go. That still hasn't happened, which tells you how difficult and emotional this decision is for Claude Giroux. But I think sometime next week things will start to escalate. In the meantime, what the Flyers have told some teams that have called is this: if Claude Giroux is ready to move, you're talking about a player that arguably could be the most impactful rental at this year's trade deadline. So there's a price attached to that. If Nick Foligno as a rental went for a first and a fourth a year ago at the deadline, then Claude Giroux is looking at a triple asset package for sure for the Flyers. A first, a young player and a prospect, or certainly at least two assets with higher quality. It's a high price to get in on Claude Giroux.
Yeah, and the future of Rasmus Ristolainen in Philadelphia could be determined as early as this week. That seems unlikely, but there will be contract discussions with Ristolainen's agent, Chuck Fletcher, general manager of the Philadelphia Flyers. They like how their defense looks moving forward into next season when healthy. They'd like Ristolainen to be a part of that. But if the contract doesn't make sense, then there's another name that we know is on the market.
In all these cases we've discussed, the players, the agents, the GMs have 3 weeks to figure it out before Trade Center on March 20th.